Hello and welcome to week 8 in the psychology of personality. We're in chapter 10, traits and trait theory as it relates to personality. Probably the most commonly known approach to personality. And when we think of personality without the benefit of taking a class on personality, we often think of personality traits. Someone's generous, or somebody's kind, or someone is vicious or seems angry all the time. That seems like emotion, but maybe they're impatient. We have all kinds of ways in which we describe individuals, and what we're usually doing is using language to describe what an individual is like, their personality. What enters in at this point in the course is it dovetails with a period of time within the history of psychology where there was a refocus of a lot of research energy moving from understanding psychology and what we all share, what is the baseline understanding of our thinking and being and the human experience, to an analysis of individual differences. So we moved from what makes us all alike to what makes us different. And in history, in the history of psychology, there's sort of a turning point when we started to examine things like personality and intelligence, and we began to develop technologies in testing. So how can we test these particular concepts on a living, breathing person in order to determine how that individual is unique and how they are alike everybody else, or how unique they are related to everybody else. That's how far are they from the mean. We start getting into this sort of statistical analysis of human behavior. And I introduced here the concept of psychometrics, which is the field of developing tests to measure human capacities, any kind of capacity. In its finest detail, there are tests that can be given to individuals that will actually identify which part of the brain is most likely to have been injured in a brain injury. It's that accurate. If there's a part of the brain that it has the ability for us to be able to draw a circle and a person can't draw a circle, then that relates to research that's been done on brain injury. And through a paper and pencil test, we can actually have a pretty good idea about the source of the brain injury. Now, on top of that, of course, we're in the world of personality. So all kinds of ways of measuring personality started to percolate. The first person that I come up to kind of get us on this sort of this sequential number of tests to introduce you was Gordon Allport. Gordon Allport, now this is the assignment in this. Gordon Allport put a list of tons and tons and tons of different words that describe personality. You will be able to access that list. I put a link to it in the assignment section within the course book. You can access that list. And what he said that of all these words that describe people, some of those words describe what he termed are cardinal traits. Cardinal traits are the ones that are the most defining for us. We look at that, say, I'm generous. And that is a core to who I am. It's a defining word. There's very rare that I would find myself not generous, and I actually perceive myself as a generous person. That kind of trait. You take that word and you put it in the bucket that's called cardinal traits. And then there were central traits, not so quite defining of who you are as a person, but still very important traits. So maybe I'm optimistic most of the time. I'm a kind of an optimistic person, so that might go into my central traits. The next one is secondary, what he used the word dispositions. Secondary dispositions are words that describe our personality, but they're related to circumstances. So under certain circumstances, that part of my personality will come out. It might be positive, it might be negative. The same as the others. You may have positive or negative dispositions that are cardinal, central. Now we're looking at secondary. But secondary, you can start to thinking, well, when I'm stressed, I'm impatient. And that would be a secondary disposition. And he said that we all have, wasn't a test, but we could look at those, we could actually look at those words, and that's what I'm going to be asking you to do. Look at those words and pick out the ones that you feel are cardinal, which ones are central, and which ones are secondary, samples of those. And that's one way to describe your personality. Now you could probably imagine, you're looking at all, you're going to go into this, and the first thing you're going to say, I predict, the first thing you'd say is like, there's a lot of words. There's all these words. Just go like, how much time do I want to spend on this assignment? I'll just pick the first 5 that I get what you're going to go through. And that is exactly what was happening in the field of psychology. They're looking at Alport's list and saying, okay, is there a better way to do this? And along came Raymond Cattell. Now, I was introduced to Raymond Cattell during my junior and senior year in my undergraduate degree in psychology. One of my advisors was the official biographer for Raymond Cattell. Raymond Cattell, very important figure in the history of psychology, a very divisive figure for reasons that I would go into on I'll probably do a nice little video on Raymond Cattell one of these days. But he developed what came to be known as the 16 personality factors test. Now, here's what he did. He went into the English dictionary. Now, you'd have to do this in other dictionaries too. And in the translation of his test to other languages, they had to do this. So he goes into the English language dictionary, picks out all the words that could be used to describe someone's personality. He then develops ways to measure the capacities in each one of those. And then he starts giving these tests. I mean, Cattell was famous for having, studies that involved 30,000, 60,000 subjects, because he did big number statistics. So he would have these tests going out, and people would rate themselves, how much, how forgiving am I, how generous am I, how kind am I, how happy I am, those, rate each other. And here's what he did. He took all of that data and he conducted a statistical procedure. He actually modified the existing procedure for his use to be able to do this, and it was a factor analysis, but he called it rotational functional analysis because he did the analysis over and over. And here's what factor analysis does. Let's take the words happy, content, and say relaxed. Okay? Now, if those 3 words are used to describe an individual, one might think that if the true disposition of a person was happy, they would also be content. And I forgot the other one. They relate to each other. Maybe the 3 of them are measuring the same thing, some degree of happiness, contentment, relaxed, sort of meta topic. And he did this through the complex statistical analysis of how do they correlate to each other. If I got high on this one, to what degree did I also get high on this one and this one? If I get low on that one, to what degree did I get low on that one and that one? And he did these analyses over and over. And he basically took all the words that were sort of related to each other statistically, and he brought them together. Like, so all of these words tend to go up and down together depending on the disposition of the person. All of these words tend to go up and down depending on the disposition of the individuals. And he grouped them together. And he came up with 16 dichotomous groups, meaning high on this, low on this, high on this, low on this, high on this, low on this. So all those words. And then he picked a word, a single word, to describe each dichotomy. So in the course book, I have presented to you this graph. This is very old. This is a copy of my results on a 16 PF that I took a long time ago. It would be profoundly different now. I know that. But what we have, we look at the first one, basically introversion versus extroversion. We have reserved, outgoing. We have concrete thinking, abstract thinking. Affected by feelings, emotionally stable. Submissive, dominant. Serious, happy-go-lucky. We see these dichotomies. And for one of the first times, we had a test that would measure 16 dimensions of personality and provide an individual from a score. One being on the left, you'll see if I score really low on particular questions, down at the bottom, you'll see I'm relaxed. If I score really high on those sets of questions, I'm tense. And you get this sort of zigzag line. That line depicts the unique trace of my qualities across those 16 dimensions. This was mind-blowing. This was really a big part of Catel's fame came from the 16 PF. It also arose from, he also did one on mood, the 8 states mood questionnaire, and that particular questionnaire had an A and B version, so you could actually measure somebody's mood, expose them to something, and then measure their mood again to see if that exposure changed their mood. And that was the test that I used in my research study to get my bachelor's degree. And that's how I met the professor that I had, who was also a fan of Raymond Cattell. So we've taken all those words and more from Alport, and we factored analysis them into 16 different parts, 16 different qualities, and then along comes Eysenck. Eysenck said that's too complicated. 16 is too much. So he factor analyzed again, and he broke it down probably more functionally, and he came up with a trait that he referred to as extroversion, grouped a whole bunch of things together for that. Then there was neuroticism, or the relative emotional stability of an individual, and then psychoticism. And I'm going to read this: the dominance, leadership, submission, sensation seeking, poor ego control, those kinds. He would measure those things. So just 3. And again, the kind of pendulum swinging of a complex definition of personality through a less complex to maybe an oversimplification. And now we're going to keep on swinging back and forth as we go from simple to complex in terms of producing tests that we can quickly give to people, give to thousands of people, and get a really good feel on many, many, many individuals' personalities. Now, as you can tell, these aren't the only, as you can guess, these are not the only 3 people that have ever studied personality. So personality traits became the bell to chase. People wanted to develop tests that, what are the personality traits, doing factor analysis. Are there 16, are there 28, are there 32, or are there only 3? Are there, going all over the place. And the research in personality psychology was widely divided on what are the personality traits. How do we measure them? How many do we want? That the test is useful, and stuff like that. And this is just normal personality. On the other side of the wall, there was also the development of abnormal personality tests. We were looking at personality disorders and mental illness and whatnot, and it measures all of this going on. Now, the field of personality researchers took it upon themselves to do a study where they analyzed the results of hundreds of examples of these research that was taken on to develop personality tests. When you have a research project that is studying the results of a variety of research projects, that research is called a meta-analysis. So they did a meta-analysis across all these different things. Over here, there's 50 traits. Over here, there's 16. Over here, there's 8. There's 3, 26. And what they found out across all of those different studies, when they did their own statistical analysis of this, they found out that there were 5 traits that were predominant in all of them, or like the vast majority of them. And that became known as the Big Five. Now, the Big Five is now a standalone theory, and now there's a Big Six, and I think there's a Big Seven. It's a moving target, right? So we're going to stick with the Big Five for right now. That stuff is still percolating. So the Big Five personality tests theory says that there are 5 very, very important traits that give us a really, really good feel for how a person's personality is. Now, the first letters of each one of these traits spells the word ocean. So, that's easy to remember. Nice word for that. Open to experiences. C, conscientiousness. E, extroversion. A is agreeableness. And N is neuroticism. Sometimes they replace that with a more politically correct question. Basically, how nervous and uptight you are. Those 5 traits are now pretty much the go-to standard if you're going to include personality as one of your factors in an experiment. So let's say you wanted to examine how does experiencing a tragedy affect someone's personality. You would look at individuals with whom you have data on their Big Five, find individuals that experienced a tragedy, give them the Big Five again, and did they change in their openness? Did they change in their conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism? Did any of those change before and after? The Big Five are used all over the place in terms of using personality as a factor in your study. And there are official, real scientific Big Five tests, and there are a plethora of tests available online. So it's probably one of the most well-known publicly available tests that there are. So I have a little slide here that this comes right from the course book here, and what I want to look at, let's look at each one of these, and we can see that here's openness, and we have the degree of intellectual curiosity, creativity, and preference. So on one end, we have inventive and curious, and on the other end, we have consistent and cautious. And you can be anywhere along that continuum in terms of your own personality. Now, what we now have, conscientiousness, tendency to be organized and dependable. We have efficient and organized on one end, easygoing and careless on the other end. And then we go down here to extroversion, the tendency to seek the company of others and talk. We have outgoing and energetic on one end, solitary and reserved on the other. And then over here we have agreeableness, measure of one's trusting and helpful nature, or friendly and compassionate on one end, challenging and detached on the other end. And then finally, here in neuroticism, the predisposition to psychological stress, sensitive and nervous, or secure and confident. Now, when we're looking at a model like this, it's very important, even with all of these tests, it's very important to take into consideration an issue that's related to the validity of test taking like this. And that is, depending on your upbringing, depending on the culture that you've grown up in, that culture is a big thing for me when you talk about personality. There might be personality traits that you think are better than other personality traits. So you may agreeableness is a great one. Maybe it's more socially advantageous to be agreeable. And if you take a test and it says you have low agreeableness and you are challenging and detached, that's no fun. Might be true, but it's, like I don't like to be labeled negatively like that. So maybe when I'm answering those questions, maybe I'm not going to be really saying exactly who I am, but maybe more who I would like to be. That sense of basically providing a socially advantageous answer to make myself look good. Now, psychometrics is not only the science of using tests to measure psychological experiences, it is also the science that goes in to defeating that particular kind of tendency. You might see, for example, taking some of these tests, that the same idea is asked more than once. And there are psychometric reasons for that. You might see questions that actually ask the opposite. Now, I would do this more would mean one direction, and another question, I do this more, would mean the other direction. So they're really testing, they're building into the structure of the tests the ability to determine if someone's simply guessing or if someone's, to some degree, the degree to which they're being honest or paying attention. And that gives, not only do you get the results, but underneath that you get a secondary pair of results from these tests that determine whether or not that actual instance of test taking was valid or not. And if it checks enough boxes, those results are thrown out. The person wasn't paying attention, they didn't take it seriously, whatever kind of thing. Nonetheless, there's always things that can sneak by, and I'm going to be asking you to take the 16 PF and the Big Five and reporting those results in a discussion board. So it is normal to think that I would not want to post too many negative things about myself in the discussion board. And that impacts the validity of these kinds of tests. If this was going to be a private test, it was only going to come to me, or it was only going to go to you. You could take that test, take those results, and you could be completely honest with yourself and get real results. Now, this is, of course, all up to you. The way I like to look at these personality tests is even when you look at something like challenging and detached, there are times at which that's an advantage to be challenging and detached, or just be challenging. If something's, you're at a workplace and the boss is doing something, sometimes it's the guy that's a jerk is going to be the one that raises his hand and say, hey, stop that. They're going to, and that's like, wow, I'm glad somebody had that part of their personality. It helped the team become a better team. So if you can characterize even I'll say the challenging, use that word, the challenging results that you get, there's essentially a positive, or let's say productive, way in which that personality trait can be expressed. Situations in which you want that kind of personality. So particularly when you're working with groups, very, very, we're going to get later into personality type. And there's a lot of work that's been done there also in terms of understanding how people work together and how different personality types and or traits can be complementary. So an individual who's extroverted in an extroverted um, person in a relationship with an introverted person, they could play off each other and have the best of both worlds. The extroverted person draws the introverted person out. The introverted person allows the individual who's extroverted to, you know, slow down and smell the flowers along the way, kind of thing. So there's always a good side to these. Now, I've pretty much already talked about the discussion and the assignment. The chapter 10 discussion, you're taking the 16 PF. There are links in the course book. And the big 5, report and discuss your results. In the assignment, I'm asking you to look at Alport's words. This is arduous. I said that right at the beginning. I'm going to be looking at all these words. I want you to pick 5 that are your cardinal. I want you to pick 5 that are central. And I want you to pick 5 that are secondary. And tell me why. You could actually just write the 5 and then tell me why. Write the 5, tell me why. Write the 5, tell me why. And use bold headings, central traits, cardinal, central, secondary. It's not an essay. It's, list, explanation, list, explanation, list, explanation. Just to kind of get a sense of this kind of like extremes. You have an example of a really complex way of pursuing understanding someone's personality, and then a relatively simple. I've seen big 5 tests with 5 questions. To what degree that's very accurate, I don't know. It might show general tendency, but usually there's not that many questions, and you answer it, and then boop, you get a score for each one of those. So from complex to relatively easy. And that's it for this week. That's looking at traits. Again, one of the most well-known, and I think cognitively, it is the way in which we perceive personalities. We see, there are things I like about a person, traits. There are things I don't like about a person. Those are other traits. Things I like about myself, traits. Things I don't like about myself, other traits. Those kind of things. We kind of think of personality in that way. So this is a very sort of basically you kind of already think about personality this way, maybe most of you. So, okay, so I'll see you online. See you in the discussions. Have a great time with this chapter and take care.